Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pachala. I am Dr. Anurekhachari Wagh, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Today we are going to discuss a paper titled Land Reform Legislation, a Sociological Assessment Part 1. This paper is part of the larger paper on agrarian relations and social structure in India. This paper is coordinated by Dr. Manish Thakur of IIM Kolkata. In this paper on land reform legislation, a sociological assessment, we are going to focus on land tenure systems under British. Further, we will also look into the history and context of land reforms in India. After doing that, we will look into the implementation of land reforms in various states and regions of India, and thereby trying to understand the significance of land reforms for agrarian system in India. Land reform legislations, a sociological assessment 1. In the wake of independence, the land question posed a challenge and an invitation to the early nationalists. Political freedom had been won on the basis of a wider coalition of the ruling elites, the peasant and the various subaltern classes. This nationalist coalition could be forged on the basis of solid support emanating from the Indian peasantry to the freedom movement. Among other things, this coalition entailed a commitment on the part of the ruling elites towards a progressive land reforms agenda. An agenda of agrarian change was the essential glue that secured the support of peasant classes prior to independence. The same was also the source of political legitimacy for the new regime after independence, which could embark upon a massive enterprise of nation building amidst political stability and the continuing support of the masses. Besides, there were several landlord-tenant conflicts in different parts of the undivided India, which in a way created enormous pressure for an agrarian reconstruction. According to P.C. Joshi, another motivating factor which created a critical situation was the stagnation of agriculture in the face of growing population. The ruling elites were forced to recognize the close interdependence of agricultural regeneration and agrarian renovation. The replacement of the unproductive landed gentry by a landowning class actively interested in farming appeared to be one of the most important preconditions of agricultural progress. Land was not in the hands of those who cultivated it and therefore needed to be transferred therein. Thus, land reform became a burning need and emerged as an important agenda during the first few decades after independence. Land reforms entailed multiple things. It referred to a planned and institutional reorganization of the relation between man and land. It implied such institutional changes which turn over ownership of the farms to those who actually till the soil. This meant a deliberate change introduced into the system of land tenure and the farming structure. Land reforms would also mean improving land tenure and institutions related to agriculture, redistribution of property rights for the benefit of the landless poor. It was also envisaged as an integrated program to remove the barriers for economic and social development caused by deficiencies in the existing land tenure system. In other words, land reform policies in their totality envisaged a thorough restructuring of agrarian relations. At its best, it was intended to achieve an egalitarian social structure by changing old land relations, realizing the age-old promise of the land to the tiller, and ultimately increasing agricultural productivity. Land tenure under the British. In the colonial period, three types of land revenue systems were institutionalized by the British in India, namely the Zamindari, Royatwari and the Mahalwari system. These three systems broadly defined relationships between landlords, tenants and laborers among the layers of land rights and the nature of control exercised by the state, and also established obligations of taxation. The Zamindari system that governed most of the eastern and northern India gave feudal lords and tax collectors permanent rights to control of the land in exchange for collecting tax from peasant tenant farmers. In contrast, under the Royatwari system of southern India, farmers were considered proprietors of the land they cultivated, paid tax directly to the state and had rights to transfer and mortgage the land. These two systems together accounted for 95% of the country. Under the Mahalwari or Mausawari system, all residents contributed to a collective tax payment by the village to the state. This system applied in the remaining 5% of the country. As time passed, all these systems gave numerous individuals intermediate rights to control land and land revenue, creating enormous pressure on those cultivating the land at the bottom of the pyramid. History and context of land reforms. D. Bandyopadhyay says that the concept of land reforms was a part and parcel of a freedom struggle. The British were concerned with taxing the land efficiently and thoroughly as revenues were required to sustain the empire. Land was therefore a challenge and an invitation to early nationalists. The national movement saw a large number of peasant uprisings as well as the participation of a large number of small and middle peasants and agricultural workers in the civil disobedience and non-cooperation movement. These peasants fought against the oppression and the atrocities in the hope that political freedom would eventually lead to economic freedom and from the clutches of the landowning classes. After independence, the Congress had the task of balancing the interests of the substantial tenants and the old landowning class interest as part of creating a broad social coalition. Though there were not too many voices in favor of the land reforms in Nehru's cabinet, land reforms were eventually adopted and accepted as an agenda in the post-independence period by a large section of the Congress, particularly by those who called themselves Congress Socialist Group. Soon after independence, the All India Congress Committee AICC set up the Agrarian Reforms Committee, also known as the Kumarappa Committee, which suggested comprehensive land reform measures including a radical ceiling on land. The first 5-year plan 1952 to 57 endorsed the recommendations of the Kumarappa Committee, but it was left to the states to implement the ceiling provisions depending on the realities of each state. Since then, land reforms have been an item for action in each of these 5-year plans. There have been several attempts to chart the growth of land reforms in phases after independence. The first phase, consisting of the long 50s, saw many legislations towards the enactment of land reforms, but none that would transfer the land to the tiller. In the second phase, which began during the 1960s to about the mid-1970s, land reforms lost their importance when India faced a major food crisis. The focus shifted from land reform to enhancement of food grain production to redeem the country from food insecurity and the humiliation of importing wheat from the US. Land reform receded from public imagination, but only temporarily. In the late 60s and early 70s, Naxalbari and the widespread rural unrest again brought back the need for land reform vociferously. The government had to think of increasing agricultural production and battle peasant insurgency alongside. This was also the time when a majority of the states passed the Land Reforms Act. The third phase till the early 1980s consisted of Mrs. Gandhi's brief flirtation with the socialist phase when she brought in legislations to mitigate inequalities in the countryside. According to Jeffrey, the attempt to end the bonded labor during the emergency, though part of such measures, were rarely implemented with persistence. Area development was an approach which was undertaken. Intensive area development programs like drought-prone area development, desert area development programs and soil conservation started and further enhanced. New impetus to dry land farming was given. Emphasis on food security continued, and there were attempts to divert land towards cultivation of food crops to improve crop diversity. The second phase of land reforms with land ceiling acts and consolidation of holdings was brought in. The fourth period begins in early 1980s with Mrs. Indira Gandhi's return to power. The rise of post-freedom struggle middle class, which came to believe that the socialist experiment had not yet yielded fruit. Tentative steps towards deregulating the economy began in the 1980s and accelerated with the financial crisis of 1991. Productivity, urbanization and land acquisition policy replaced land to the tiller as topics of discussion and policy-making conclaves. The 7th 5-year plan 1985 to 90 made an attempt to link land reforms to other major programs of the plan by recognizing its centrality in the whole process of rural development and poverty alleviation. But the onset of liberalization changed the focus of the state towards those dependent on land for their livelihoods. Though land reform legislations became active, land policies in the most recent decades have focused less on land reform and more on land development and administration. Land reform legislations. When India became independent, several important issues confronted the policymakers. Land was concentrated in the hands of a few, and there was a proliferation of intermediaries who were not interested in cultivation themselves. They were only interested in leasing out land. The tenancy contracts were expropriative in nature, and the tenant exploitation was ubiquitous. The revenue records were in an extremely bad shape, giving rise to mass litigation. Land policies in our country were shaped in the context of these anxieties. The newly independent state had to address land policy because India is a densely populated agrarian economy, and almost all development initiatives also involve land as a central issue. Moreover, land also clearly represented social status and was not just a means of production. Land reform legislation consisted of 5 important components: the enacted legislation aimed at regulating tenancy, abolition of intermediate interest in land, limiting the size of land holdings and redistributing the surplus land, distributing government wasteland to those without agricultural land and house, and land consolidation. Tenancy reform. In India, tenancy was a widespread phenomenon in the period after independence. The system was favorable to the landlords as most tenancies were oral and landlords could terminate them at will. Recognizing the exploitative nature of tenancy, the relations in the 60s and 70s, every Indian state passed tenancy reform legislation. These laws affected both existing and future tenancies and were intended to give tenants greater security. The major planks of tenancy reform included security of tenure, termination of tenancy, resumption for personal cultivation by the landlord, regulation of rent, and confirmation of ownership rights. But the agrarian structure was quite diverse and therefore no uniform guidelines could be formulated for the whole of the country. Only some broad guidelines could be given in the successful plan documents. The consensus on the policy of tenancy reforms favored neither complete expropriation of landlordism nor the interest of the tenants. In the national guidelines, the following measures were communicated to the state government for incorporation in the state legislation. Security of the tenancy was to be conferred on actual tiller. Fair rent was to be fixed, ranging between 20 to 25% of the gross produce. Landowners were permitted to cultivate land for the personal use. Surrender of tenancy rights was to be with mutual consent. With respect to some areas, the landlord and tenant relation had to be brought to an end, and tenant cultivator was to be brought directly into contact with the state. Disabled person, defense personnel, and other such exemption to be allowed to lease the land. The term personal cultivation was to be clearly defined. If landlords removed their tenants in order to resume cultivation, tenancy records were to be corrected. Since land was a subject under jurisdiction of the state and the relationship between production and land tenure varied from state to state, national policy recommendations resulted in differing tenancy reforms laws in each state. Another aspect of these tenancy reforms was the provision of allowing landlords to remove tenants in order to resume personal cultivation. This assumed greater importance as the dominant landlords took advantage of this clause. This clause was added with a view to induce a landlord to undertake personal cultivation and also to control absentee landlordism. Tenancy Acts as almost all states allowed the landlord to return land if required for personal cultivation, but the terms and definitions differed. Most tenancy reform laws also contained provisions concerning the ability of tenants to surrender the land back to the landlord voluntarily. These provisions were used by the landlords to weaken the impact of the laws. In most states, the surrender of land falls under the jurisdiction of the revenue authorities. The authorities allowed such surrender after verification of the voluntary element of the process. It is said that the strong relationship between landlords and revenue officials often allowed the landlord to skirt the law's intention. Tenants in some states were also given the right to purchase the land. For example, in Maharashtra, where tenancy is not prohibited, the tenant acquires the right to purchase the land after 1 year from the date of tenancy. Landowners resisted the implementation of these reforms by directly using the political clout and also by using various methods of evasion and coercion, which include registering their own land under the names of different relatives to bypass the ceiling, shuffling tenants around tenancy plots of land so that they would not acquire incumbency rights as stipulated in the tenancy law, and possibly even outright eviction. Abolition of intermediaries. Abolition of intermediate interest in land that had been created during the British period is considered as an aspect of land reform which was relatively successful. British had created a set of intermediaries with vested interest in land, that is zamindars who had the right to collect tributes in return for which they had to pay a land tax to the government. But these intermediaries gradually developed a stake in the land under them, nearly half of the land under the system at the time of independence. This system was exploitative and the land reforms tried to abolish the intermediaries and curtail the power of these large landlords so that cultivator of the land came to direct contact with the government. This was expected to minimize unjust extraction of surplus by the landlord. Since land reforms was a state subject, almost every Indian state passed laws restructuring the system of land holdings and land revenue to abolish intermediate interest. It is believed that these legislative efforts were effective, though the effect expectedly varied across states and over time. State laws eliminated large population of intermediate interest in land, and 20 to 25 million tenants became landowners. However, these legislations were also accompanied by a few costs. In few areas, in anticipation of the new legislation, landlords evicted sharecroppers and tenants at will in order to prevent them from gaining rights. Land was even registered under the names of different relatives to bypass the ceiling limit. In addition, shortcomings in the laws itself prevented the state from protecting and empowering the poorest tenants. However, this phase of land reforms was enacted more comprehensively than other aspects like tenancy and land ceiling. As a result, despite the deficiency in legislation, this effort is judged among the most successful. Land ceiling. All the Indian states adopted land ceiling legislation that limited the amount of agricultural land a person or a family can own. The laws were designed to make land holdings equal by taking possession of the excess land, which would then be redistributed to the poor, landless and marginal farmers. Land ceiling laws were enacted for the first time during the 1950s and 60s. They were revised after the national guidelines were issued in 1972. With some exceptions, the laws have not been effective. Some of the reasons were inadequate compensation by the government for the land that they took, which made the program unpopular among landlords, existence of loopholes and gaps in laws that landowners used to their advantage, distribution of relatively large parcels of land by the state, which ultimately benefits a small percentage of landless families that benefited, outdated and incomplete land records, which made implementation of the ceiling legislation difficult. Ceiling laws vary by state. In Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, the law permits a family of 5 to hold between 10 to 54 acres of land depending upon the quality of land. In both states, the law permits the state to buy land above the ceiling, but the required payment to the landowner is set as a much lower level. The state prioritizes the distribution of surplus land to the landless and disadvantaged household. In Andhra Pradesh, the state grants surplus land to beneficiary in parcels up to 2.5 acres of wet and 5 acres of dry land. According to an estimate, Andhra Pradesh has distributed a total of 5,82,319 acres of ceiling surplus land to 50,344 beneficiaries, while Karnataka distributed 68,745 acres of land to 33,610 beneficiary households. West Bengal set a relatively lower land ownership ceiling than the other states and redistributed the surplus land on smaller plots. According to the law, the government has to pay landowners for land taken by the state, but the payment is less than the market value. A landowner can also lose land if the landowner fails to personally farm it. The state distributes land to local residents who own less than 1 acre of farmland. The law gives preference to specific disadvantaged group and persons who form a cooperative society. West Bengal distributed 1.04 million acres of land of ceiling surplus land to 2.54 million land poor households. The total amount of land distributed amounts to approximately 4% of India's agricultural land. The only states where more than 5% of agricultural households benefited are West Bengal, Jammu and Kashmir and Assam. West Bengal distributed surplus land to 34% of agricultural households and accounts for 40% of the ceiling surplus land beneficiaries in India. The state's relative success is based on several factors. First, the law has fewer loopholes than most of the other state reform laws. Second, the state government's political will led to more effective implementation. Finally, the state government's emphasis on distributing the benefits widely but in smaller plots led to more grassroots support for the process. Government land allocation programs. In addition to the legislative abolishment of intermediaries tenancy reform, ceiling laws, some states conducted major efforts to allocate government land to land poor families. Bandyopadhyay recollects, and it is also quite interesting to note that at the height of Green Revolution, when the entire effort of the Indian state was to attain self-sufficiency in food grain production, the government of India could think drastically of reducing land ceiling for redistributed land reform. It did for some time have the effect on reducing the intensity of rural violence. States have used government land to allocate both house sites and agricultural plots to land poor. How does this help the poor? According to a report which is not dated, even small plots that are 0.07 to 0.10 acre that is about 3,000 to 4,500 square feet in size, have been shown to provide the following benefits to the farm worker families by providing most or all of the family's fruit and vegetable needs, space to keep livestock that can provide income, that is from the sale of products equivalent to the wages of one full-time adult farm labor, chance to create wealth through the growth of valuable trees and labor-intensive improvements to a plot, a valued boost in social status, improved access to credit, the basis for ending a family's dependency on a large landowner. However, many of these benefits of the house plots are directed towards and received by the women. It is widely believed when women have control over a house plot, its use and production, they will tend to use the benefits of the plot, including increased amounts of food and surplus income, to benefit the children and the family. Unfortunately, India-wide, the vast majority of rural housing programs provide the poor with very limited space, leaving very little room beyond the footprint of a small house. Karnataka and West Bengal have recognized the opportunity in small-sized plots. Both states recently adopted new programs designed to provide landless and other poor families with access to land that can provide substantial benefits to the family. Wasteland allocation has also been a government initiative as part of land reform. Wastelands are lands that are either entirely barren or are producing significantly below their economic potential. An estimated of 150 million acres of India's 810 million acres are wasteland, and most are owned by state government. India has tried a variety of ways to use its wasteland to provide the poor with access to land. According to an estimate, the state government have allocated 14.7 million acres of government wasteland to poor rural households through land reforms programs. 6 states account for 80% of this land, led by Andhra Pradesh. Most of the allocations took place in the 1970s and the 1980s. Most beneficiaries received between 2 and 3 acres of land. In recent years, wasteland distribution programs have slowed or stopped altogether. In addition to the lack of the new allocations, recent field studies show a significant portion of the government land supposedly given to poor families is actually not in their possession. In Andhra Pradesh, for example, observers estimate that many of the reported recipients of government wasteland are not in legal or physical possession of the land. In some cases, land were distributed on paper but not on ground. In other cases, land were distributed on the ground but without formal legal documentation. And in still other cases, more powerful interest in the village forced the grantees of the land. Indeed, in many states, the failure of the state government generally to maintain an accurate current land records has also undermined their ability to undertake effective redistribution of land, including government land. The Andhra Pradesh state government, with World Bank support, is taking steps to identify and correct cases where the grantees are not in secure legal and physical possession. It is also pursuing the allocation of unallocated wasteland and other innovative and decentralized methods for providing secure land rights to the rural poor. State efforts may provide useful models for other states and countries. Land consolidation. Consolidation of land holdings was another aspect of land reform that tried to ensure that small parts of land belonging to the same landowner but situated at some distance from one another could be consolidated into a single land holding to increase productivity. However, this aspect proved to be difficult to implement in practical terms due to a variation in land quality across plots. Implementation of land reforms. Implementation of land reform has been uneven in India, to say the least. However, in order to acquire a sense of extent of land reforms, we will discuss how it was received in different regions of the country. The legislative approaches varied by the state. Land ceiling laws were first enacted in the 50s and the 60s. They were revised after national guidelines were issued in 1972. D. Bandyopadhyay, who has tirelessly recording the progress of land reform, says that of the 25 states, there are no land ceiling laws in Meghalaya, Nagaland, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Arunachal Pradesh, Goa, Daman and Diu and Mizoram. There is no implementation of land reform laws in Sikkim as well. Now, Kerala has made a valiant effort in instituting land reforms during 1950s. Initially, the bill was adopted, but subsequently it was taken up in 1969 by the CPIM-led coalition under C. Achyuta Menon, who carried it through. The Kerala Land Reforms Amendment Act of 1969 made large number of landless people into owners of land. Tenants became landowners, and more importantly, landless laborers were given the ownership of 1/10 of an acre of land on which their hut stood. This device of bestowing ownership rights on a tiny occupied space and small plot around it became a favored model of other state governments thereafter. In West Bengal, after the CPIM government came to power, they followed the Kerala model and granted ownership of 0.8 acres of land to agricultural labourers. Operation Barga from 78 to 81 recorded 1.2 million sharecroppers in 3 years, giving them hereditary rights of cultivation and a fair deal in crop sharing with a certificate of sharecropping, which could be used as a document to establish one's identity and also for securing crop loans for institutions. These people remained loyal to the communist government for years. Whether states would permit the creation of new tenancies was perhaps the most controversial aspect of tenancy laws. Karnataka, West Bengal, Andhra Pradesh are representative in some ways. In Andhra Pradesh, the law gave many existing tenants perpetual rights to tenanted land. The Telangana area of Andhra Pradesh prohibits new tenancies unless the landowner is a small holder holding less than 18 acres of irrigated land or deemed disabled, increasingly a status defined also to include women. In Andhra area of Andhra Pradesh, the law permits tenancy relations, but they must meet strict requirements regarding duration, rates and renewal that grant substantial rights to qualifying tenants. In West Bengal, only share tenants were entitled to permanent rights and at a regulated share rent. In Karnataka, law prohibits tenancy with few minor exceptions. The state has the power to seize land leased without compensation to the landowner and to distribute land to the land poor families. With some exceptions, West Bengal does not allow fixed rent cash tenancies, but does allow sharecropping, although because the law gives permanent right to sharecroppers, it discourages landowners from future sharecropping relationships. In conclusion, dear friends, we could see that land reform is a radical step towards empowering a large masses of people. Further, it is a legal intervention to bring about rural reconstruction. Among many things, what are the important areas that the land reforms emphasized? First, it tried to erase vested interest in land. Secondly, it tried to bring in land to the tillers, thereby trying to understand and engage with the question of land in India. Further, it tried to improve land records, which was very important for formulating a very coherent and very sustainable land policy in India. It also tried to impose a ceiling on land, which was a very important step towards rural redistribution of property and access to property. And lastly, it also looked into regulate the tenancies, which also helped in accessing property of large number of people dependent on agriculture. Therefore, in all contexts, even though there were great problems in terms of implementation of land reforms, we could see there is increased significance of land reforms in India. Thank you.